Well, it is my great pleasure to be able to speak with two people who have been, for me, true heroes. And I want to describe why I consider them heroes, because anyone who fights against deception and fraud the way these two people have done is a hero in my books. And they have been doing this for years, and they do this with a gentlemanly courtesy and precision that is unknown in the new world of culture, where if somebody doesn't like what you say, they decide to punch you or run away or whatever. So I give you my tremendous praise for that. We're going to have a fascinating program because today we're going to talk about the Apollo moon missions. Now, for those who don't know you, I'm Emanuel Garcia. I'm a retired psychoanalyst, psychiatrist, now living in New Zealand. I was a young man, a teenager, flying to a hockey camp in Canada on the night when the first Apollo moon mission landed, and it was one small step for a man and one giant leap for mankind. And I remember looking out the airplane window for my first jet ride in my life and thinking, incredible, wondrous, marvelous, unbelievable. And through all the depredations of American foreign policy, for example, in Vietnam and all around the world, all these terrible things, I would tell my kids, yeah, but you know what? We did something good too. We went to the moon. We did something for all of humanity. And, we achieved this great aspiration. I guess about 4 or 5 years ago when I decided, I don't even know what stimulated me, but I decided I just wanted to take another look at the moon issue. And when I looked at the Apollo missions and I read and heard Marcus Allen and I followed Scott and I've read many, many books now, all the founding initial people who did the research and later, and I have to conclude that it was probably the most unique mass deception in history, perhaps because it was such a positive one. It was a positive illusion, as I see it. And today we're going to discuss why these individuals have come to the conclusion that the Apollo moon missions were indeed a deception. Before we get into it, a few words. By having this program, we're not advising anyone with any legal or medical matters or whatever. We're just having an intelligent discussion and can download it, use it, do whatever you want to do with it. Okay. And whatever we say here is spontaneous. We haven't scripted anything, but we have a general idea of some topics to cover.
I'm Marcus Allen. So thank you very much, Manny, for the introduction and for the opportunity to be here, because it's an interesting area, as you've already discovered. It's something which, let's say, the majority of the population of the world are aware of it. Maybe not the details, but they are aware that America went to the moon. They were the first people to do it. They demonstrated incredible technological ability to launch that huge rocket. It's called the Saturn V rocket because it had 5 engines. So this idea that maybe it was not quite as honest as we've been led to believe is something which has intrigued me for many years. As you can tell, I was around when it happened in 1969. I was living in London at the time, and I watched the whole thing, the launch and the landings. I watched it on my little black and white television. I didn't have color television in those days. I didn't have it. So I watched it on black and white television, and I thought, wow, what an incredible achievement. They've landed on the moon. Amazing. And I believed it. I had no reason not to. And it was over the years that followed, I was aware of some discussions taking place about Apollo. And one of the principal people I got to know quite well, David Percy and Mary Bennett, who wrote probably the definitive book on the subject, Dark Moon, Apollo and the Whistleblowers. That book was written by David and Mary. David did most of the research. 8 years he spent doing the research. I read the book, I met David, I met Mary. We have actually appeared on a television program in the UK, which commemorated the launch of the book, myself and a few other friends. This was back in the early 1990s. So I've been around this block a few times. I've examined a lot of the evidence. I've been in touch with David. I've been in touch with many of the people who have, shall we say, challenged Apollo. They challenged it because it's easy to challenge. Now, I was trained as a photographer in London back in the 1960s.
Okay. Yep.
Everything that happened in London in the 1960s as a photographer, that's true, I'm told.
Well, let me interrupt now. You must have seen the great Antonioni film Blow Up which
Oh, I
is
have.
about photography.
Interesting film, that one.
Yeah,
It's worth looking at. It's a bit of a historical document now, but some famous people in it.
great film. I think it's a great. I love Antonioni, by the way. I think he's a great
Yeah,
filmmaker.
it was great. It was a great film. There are plenty of films like that around. There are plenty of people in London doing some, shall we say, unorthodox things. So I was part of a fairly broad community. And I started looking into this Apollo story. You know, everybody believed it. Everybody, it's wonderful. You know, we're all saying amazing stuff. I started looking into it. And being a photographer, I looked at the photographs. And there was one particular photograph which I was aware of because it's a very well-known one from Apollo 11, the photograph of allegedly Buzz Aldrin climbing down the ladder to join Neil Armstrong on the lunar surface. Neil Armstrong took the photograph. And I thought, there's something wrong with that photograph. It didn't take long to find out what it was because the shadow of the lander is supposed to cover that whole area. You see where the shadow is, the
Yeah.
shadow, because the sun is illuminating the scene. So he is in shadow. Now, I knew enough about photography to know that that cannot happen without additional lighting. So I had to look, was there additional lighting? No, there wasn't. This is all taken on photographic film. Anybody not familiar with photographic film? Most people use digital cameras these days. Those take photographs quite differently. A digital camera records digitally. A film camera records on photographic film. This is photographic film. It's a plastic backing coated with a light sensitive emulsion. And it's the emulsion which records the image, and then it's developed in various chemicals, and you produce a photograph. You either produce a negative, which is then printed to produce a positive image, or it's a positive image if it's a transparency. But this is what it was using, photographic film,
Right.
not digital. They hadn't been invented at the time of Apollo.
Right.
I thought, hang on a minute, how did they get that light into the subject? Because Buzz Aldrin is clearly illuminated. You can tell from the image, he's clearly illuminated. He's wearing a white spacesuit, and you can see inside at the top there, there's the hatch through which he's just exited, and that is illuminated too. How did the light get there? Oh, it's bounced off the lunar surface. That was the explanation that most people would give. Very bright light on the surface of the moon,
Yeah.
bounced in. Then I saw the other photographs showing the same scene, the lander, but because that wasn't the main point of the photograph, there was no light. You couldn't see the detail you could on that photograph. So I thought, hang on, there's something going on here that isn't being talked about. How did that light get to the point where he's so well illuminated, he's lit up like a Christmas tree?
Hmm. Yeah. So you're a photographic expert. You experienced the moon landings with the awe and the satisfaction that most everyone else did and the admiration. And
Yep,
then you began to see these anomalies because of your expertise. Now,
yep.
I want to get to Scott. I want Scott to give a biography of himself as well, a little bit, but you're also an editor. Tell us a little bit about who you are besides an investigator into the moon missions.
Well, Nexus Magazine.
Okay.
I distribute Nexus Magazine, which is an Australian publication. I distribute Nexus in the UK and Europe. And I was down in Glastonbury, not for the music festival. That's not actually held in the town of Glastonbury. It's held about 5 miles outside. But nobody has really heard of Pilton, which is the place that the music festival takes place.
Okay.
Glastonbury is quite well known. So it's called the Glastonbury Music Festival. And I was down there one year, not for that. I was down there for the Glastonbury Symposium, which is a meeting held in the town hall in Glastonbury of people looking into things like Apollo, hidden history, future science, so what Nexus covers, who built the Great Pyramid, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
The things that are not reported in the mainstream press are
Yeah.
discussed at the Glastonbury Symposium. And I was
Okay.
down there. Somebody showed me a copy of this magazine. I never heard of Nexus magazine. And it had stories about the car that ran on water, which was interesting. So I was interested in, shall we say, alternative subjects, subjects that were not normally carried in the press that most people will read. I'd come across Eric von Daniken's book, Chariots of the Gods, in 1968 when it was first published.
Yeah.
I was familiar with the whole sort of alternative view of history, of science, and so it wasn't a big stretch for me to assume that Apollo needed some questions asked. And that was in the early 1990s. I started looking into it. There were only about three or four books published at the time challenging Apollo. This being the first one, Bill Casing's book, We
Yep.
Never
Which I
Went to the
have, and I've
Moon.
read that. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's, shall we say, there were certain mistakes made in it, which Bill did acknowledge later on, but he asked some questions which were not being answered. Because NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, will not address questions they're not comfortable with. So Bill Casing asked the questions, why aren't there any stars in the photographs? Which has been answered many times. It's not something which anybody should ask today because it's not even relevant. The stars are not bright enough to be recorded on the film that was being used as a basic answer. But he started to ask questions about Apollo. And that was followed a few years later by Ralph Renee's book, NASA Mooned America,
Yep. I read that.
uh,
Yep.
which is, that's quite a good book in terms of some of the points that he makes in it. I mean, Ralph has never claimed to be an astronaut. He's very intelligent. He's actually passed away now.
Yeah.
And he was asking the questions. He was asking, how can men survive in this little capsule on the way to the moon? It's in bright sunlight. How did it keep cool? Which is a very interesting question because what is the temperature inside a spacecraft if it's in sunlight 24 hours a day, which the Apollo spacecraft going to the moon were? They were in sunlight the whole time. And he calculated what the internal temperature of the spacecraft could be, 246 degrees Fahrenheit, or about
Mhm.
120 degrees centigrade, which is the sort of temperature you cook your chicken at. And humans can't survive at that temperature. So there were more questions being asked, more ideas being put forward. Was Apollo real?
Yeah.
And at the end of a lot of discussion, I jointly published a book called The Apollo Moon Hoax, The Real Evidence.
Okay.
The
And where can
evidence
people
was
get
good.
that now, Marcus? Where can people get that book?
You can get that through Amazon quite easily.
Okay.
I just put my name in, or The Apollo Moon Hoax. You look for Trevor Weaver. He's written four other books on the subject. There's a lot of books coming out now.
Yeah.
It's on Amazon.
Before we go into that, let me get Scott to talk a little bit about himself.
All
So,
right. Okay.
Scott, you give us a
Yeah.
little bio. Who are you? How did you experience the Apollo moon mission, and how did you get into questioning?
Well, thank you for having me on the show to start with. It's always an honor to be on any show. I'm a Canadian born citizen. I was just starting high school in 1969. And given the fact that all of the science teachers in the high school were very excited about the Apollo missions, you go in their laboratories, whatever they were doing, right? And they had all of this stuff up. They had big plastic models of the Apollo rocket and the whole 9 yards. And you go into the classroom and they sit down, in the first 20 minutes, you're going to watch the videos from MIT, all those videos from
Yeah.
MIT. And I was always interested in space and stuff like that, and continued to do so. But I had no reason not to believe what I was being told. I mean, I was in high school. It's 1969. Women were burning their bras. Mini skirts were at the height of whatever. I mean, you could told me aliens landed and they're invading the world. I could give a shit. I had other things to do. There's no reason not to believe people who are in authority, your science teachers, they're highly educated, whatever, that man landed on the moon. And for many, many years, why would I even question it? I was always a space enthusiast. I was always reading every article I could get. And when you were able to start downloading stuff in the late 1990s off the internet, I found the journal site. I'm downloading the PDF files. I'm reading. I like to read all of the data, all of the technical data that would just bore the hell out of anybody, right? But I'm reading all of this stuff.
Right.
Right?
So let me stop you for a second. So you're a kid in early adolescence, and the world is huge, big, it's full of wonder, it's bursting
Yeah.
with possibility. And here the United States has gone to the moon. I mean, there are no limits. The frontier of space is being conquered. And exactly right. So I felt the same way as you. I thought just as magnificent. Meanwhile, the War is going on. They're killing people left and right, and all that mess is happening. But we have this glorious, glowing achievement for all of us. And as you say, you're at that age where the world is huge, full of possibility and future. So now we get back to you decide you're downloading all the photos, all the data, you're reading all this stuff, and what happens?
What happened? I came across a video. It happened to be James Collier.
Oh, yes, the Collier brothers. I know. Yep. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And I sat and watched that, which led me to start going, man, this guy's really got a few points here. I better take a little deeper dive in. And of course, I came across Marcus Allen. What's that, 2000 or 2001, where you did the interview with Mary Bennett and David Percy and that,
Yep.
and stuff like that. And I thought, I got to research this. So I went back because I knew where the journal site was, and I started downloading the photographs that they were talking about. I'm going, well, are they right in this, you know? And then you come across and you find out that, oh, hey, Bill Casing wrote a book. So, you know, you get a hold of the thing and you look at it and he's going, well, there's no blast crater. There's no this, there's no that. So I started downloading the photographs because I figured if it was going to be taken on Earth, I would find something on the ground. I was more interested in what is on the ground. So it took me probably 3 years to download all of the photographs.
So let me clarify for our audience. You downloaded all of the Apollo mission photographs, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay. And again, you're in this phase, as I was, and I think as Marcus was, as we didn't even question this achievement. We
Yeah.
assumed it was absolutely as they said. I have to just interject for 1 second. Do you remember, I forget which mission it was, but when whoever it was hauled out started playing golf on the lunar surface, I felt a little bit of a twinge of discordance for a moment. Not that I did anything with it, but it struck me. It continues to strike me, by the way. Because the moon, as we know, is not a particularly hospitable environment for anybody. Anyway, we can get into all that later. But so,
Yeah.
so Scott, what you've done is you were beginning to question, as Marcus was, correct? So then you go to the evidence and you're looking at the photographic evidence, also the way Marcus has. And so what happens when you do that?
Well, I happened to be looking after my parents. They needed an extra bit of care to keep them in their home and stuff like that. So basically, I'm sitting there at nighttime, you know, to monitor my mother and father, right? Well, particularly my father at the time. So I'm sitting there, have to find something very quiet to do. I'm downloading all these photographs. I'm studying these photographs, and I'm taking each of the photographs and I'm breaking them into 16 separate frames and analyzing each of the 16 frames across.
Really? So you were that methodical, that meticulous.
Well, I'm sitting there quiet. I'm sitting 10 and 12 hours a night for 3 and 4 years here
Right.
at that time with my father,
Wow.
right? And I just couldn't put it down. I'm sitting looking at it and I'm looking at that. And if I stop and I'm reading documents and stuff, I reread it again and realize that, well, hey, they identified all of these problems that they had in constructing this equipment. Where's the PDF file that showed that they fixed all of these problems? And you can't find them.
That's very interesting.
Like I've got thousands of PDF files from the journal site. Some of them are like people think it's ridiculous because they're 700 and 800 pages long, right? And I've read them. It doesn't matter. But you sit down and you're looking at the photographs, and of course, I started to come across anomalies on the ground, and I wanted to reach out to somebody, and I contacted a few people, and I got zero response, with the exception of Marcus Allen.
So really, so it was Marcus who responded to you.
He was the first one coming back, going, "Hey, that's interesting," kind of stuff, and we started that a constant email going back and forth. As a matter of fact, I have all of the emails.
Yeah.
So what we've established is we have two people who are, first of all, they're curious. They don't necessarily accept things that we're told at face value. I mean, listen, I grew up, I'm sure my father always said, you know, don't believe everything you read. I mean, you can take that to the nth degree now. I don't believe anything at this point that I need to get proof. But you're curious. Marcus, you're curious about the hidden history, as it were, things we weren't told, in the schools, the whitewashing in the schools, and the illusion in the schools. Scott, you're curious too. You find Marcus, you go right to the evidence with the tenacity of a great scientist, and then you're discovering things and you're asking questions. So we have two people asking questions, which is part of what being human is. We should be asking questions, right?
Exactly. But because I
Exactly.
was studying the photographs and he has used and operated these very cameras, he has an intimate detail of these cameras. I didn't know anything about the cameras. I had to rely on Marcus.
Right. So let's go to Marcus. So, Marcus, let's go to the major bits of evidence that really jolted you about all of this.
It was a long process because I didn't want to not believe it.
Right.
Because, I was what, age 25 or so when it happened. So I was familiar with what was going on. But when I started finding these anomalies, these unanswered questions, the things which were reasonable questions to ask, but nobody had been asking them. Well, David Percy was probably one of the first. Bart Sibrel came along. He was challenging it as well. Ralph Rene, we've already mentioned, he was doing quite a lot of work there as well. So I knew there were people working in the area, but I didn't want it to be faked. I wanted it to be real. But the more I looked into the detail of it, and having got in touch with Scott and know how much detail he had got, he'd done the deep dives into the technical side of it, the NASA reports. Now, obviously, it wasn't just NASA who were doing this information. It was all the companies that they were contracting. Boeing were contracted to build the Saturn V rocket. Grumman were contracted to build the landers. Rocketdyne were contracted to build all the engines. So there are a lot of other companies around. And what Scott has discovered, which is an interesting point, that a lot of companies were asked to do the research because NASA is not an investigation agency. They're an organization agency. They coordinate activity from other people.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
We'll come to the 400,000 people who worked on Apollo later. That always comes up, that one. And why the Russians didn't blow the whistle. We'll
Yeah.
cover all that. But having discovered the amount of detail that Scott had identified and had recorded, there were 5,771 photographs taken allegedly on the lunar surface. So if you look through all of those, some of them are not very interesting, some are out of focus, some don't even show very much of interest at all. But several of them are quite informative. And the photographs there on the screen now, there are 7 photographs in total. It's a sequence of photographs taken by Neil Armstrong of Buzz Aldrin exiting the lunar lander on Apollo 11.
And let me interject for 1 second. Now, as far as we know, we have no photographs of the man who took that first step, that small step, Neil Armstrong on the moon, correct?
There is one photograph which is identified many years later. It was part of a panorama. That's a sequence of photographs taken, and you can join them all up so you get a big scene.
Okay.
There's one photograph in a panorama which shows Neil Armstrong, but his back view. And that was part of a sequence of photographs which showed Neil Armstrong. It didn't show his front view.
Okay.
The other views are of him being reflected in a visor, in Buzz Aldrin's visor, because Neil Armstrong was taking the photographs. Buzz Aldrin was wandering around planting flags and kicking rocks and generally sort of showing what it's like to be on the moon.
Yeah.
And that was part of the film. So you've got these anomalies. Where is Neil Armstrong in all this? Oh, he's taking the photographs. Well,
Yeah.
how do we know he's taking the photographs? How do we know it's Neil Armstrong? You can't see him because his visor is such that it covers his face. People will say, yeah, there is one picture showing Neil Armstrong and his face because he's got the sun at a particular angle. Anyway,
So I would like to make the point as a psychologist, it's an interesting omission that the man who achieved this crowning achievement and should have been highlighted in some way was never highlighted in that manner. You would think that normally you go to a birthday party, take a picture of the kid whose birthday it is,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
But Neil Armstrong is not there. Interesting. But let's go back to those
Yeah.
sequence of 7 photos that we were talking about.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we got some top left is Buzz Aldrin exiting the lander.
Right.
That photograph, we can cover it later, but that photograph is not a real photograph in terms of he's kneeling in the doorway with his backpack, the PLSS, Portable Life Support System, his breathing kit. In that doorway, just above the point where his backpack is cut off, it's a console which carries a lot of equipment because the astronauts are standing in there, Aldrin on the left of the picture, Armstrong on the right. Armstrong had to be first out because there's a door which has been opened at that point.
Right.
And you'll see there is a black cord coming
Yes.
out of the doorway. That was used to lower the camera down so that Neil Armstrong could then take the photographs. Anyway, he's standing in the doorway, but above his backpack, directly above it, the top of the door, there's a panel that juts out about 10 inches. There's no way he could be kneeling in that position if that was a real lander. It wasn't. That's a mock-up of a lander. On the left there, we've got Buzz Aldrin kneeling in the doorway. You can see the top of his heels.
Yeah.
On the right, you can see the doorway. Yeah.
So what you're saying is in that position, he could never have assumed that position because he would have abutted the ledge above him had
That's
he been
right.
actually in that position.
And that ledge above him, you can see those 4 yellow vertical levers. They're the controls that Neil Armstrong used to land the craft. They're not movable. You can't take them away.
So he wasn't just backing out. You don't see him on his knees backing out in that picture on the left?
Now, in fact, it was Scott who identified that a few years back. He said, how could he be in that position given the equipment above him? We still haven't had an answer to that. So that's just one anomaly. I mean, there are so many anomalies we've identified now. And you asked originally, what was the process I got to come to my conclusion?
Yeah.
These photographs were one part of it. I'd looked at virtually every photograph. I said there were 5,771 taken on the lunar surface. There were about 30,000 taken during the Apollo missions, going to the moon, behaving in the craft and all that. But on the lunar surface, there's 5,771. There are 7 of them there. We're looking at them now. Top left is the one we've just discussed.
Okay.
The next one to the right of it is Buzz Aldrin lying on his front, coming out of the doorway.
Yeah.
Before he gets down the ladder. Now, he's not going to be able to see much given that position. He's wearing his full spacesuit. You can't land on the moon in your jeans and t-shirt, obviously. You've got to wear a spacesuit.
Right.
It's a very, very hostile place, as you've already said. It has extremes of temperature. In the sun, it's hotter than any place here on Earth. And in the shade, in the shadow, it's colder than any place here on Earth, which
Right.
includes Antarctica and Siberia. They go down to only about -80. On the moon, they go down to -150. It's not a place that humans are designed to survive in. So he's coming down the ladder. Notice how brightly lit he is, and inside that porch area. It's a good picture. There's no doubt about that. Whoever took these knew what they were doing.
It would seem to me as if the sun were shining in this direction onto them from behind.
Yes, it is.
But you can see down here, they're fully in the shade. It's fully shaded.
Now, just to continue the story, we've got Neil Armstrong is on the surface of the moon. He's just come out, done his one small step for man and all that. Great line, that. Everybody remembers it. And he's taking the photographs. Now, obviously, he is in sunlight, but it's not enough. His spacesuit, which is quite bright, is not large enough to provide that amount of illumination. He's wearing a spacesuit. He's about 6 foot tall, so the total area will be about 12 square feet of reflective material. That is not enough to illuminate a 20-foot high object, which is what this lander is.
Right. You're talking about Neil Armstrong. You're saying the argument about this being lit up this way is because it's reflected light. And you're saying that Neil Armstrong in sunlight with his bright spacesuit could not have illuminated Buzz Aldrin and the craft from behind like this.
Exactly. To demonstrate that, if you look on that middle picture we've been looking at, bottom left is the lunar surface, which is not overexposed in the film. It's directly illuminated by the sun.
Right.
There is no way that that amount of illumination on Buzz Aldrin coming down the ladder could occur, as NVIDIA demonstrated or tried to demonstrate. Oh, it was Neil Armstrong, that was reflecting the light. There are many things they got wrong in their assessment of it. So I'm sure their GPUs are very effective, but they couldn't get that right. I was invited to go onto that program and discuss it with NVIDIA, but
Yeah.
they were going to make me sign a non-disclosure agreement, and I would have had to shut up for 5 years.
And non-disclosure agreement, really?
Yeah,
Oh my
yeah,
gosh. So let me summarize. So what you're saying is this illumination cannot be explained. This beautiful photographic illumination where you see the bright dancing Buzz Aldrin leaping in space, coming down the ladder, the gold
yeah.
foil of the craft, the ladder, that should have been in shade,
Yeah,
basically.
it showed. That picture we're looking at there is one of the most ridiculous photographs I've ever seen, allegedly taken on the moon. His right foot is not touching the ladder. His left foot is stuck out at a stupid angle, as if he's sort of skipping down the ladder. If you examine the ladder itself, there is a support in the center of the ladder, and if his foot misses the ladder, he's dead. He's going to fall down 10 feet. He's probably going to break his spacesuit.
Yeah.
He's lit up like the proverbial Christmas tree, and the lunar surface is not overexposed. Photographic film does not work that way.